which is a subset of the DevOps technology pillar. We kicked off this working group a little over a month ago, and we decided to start with a questionnaire to answer the question, what is low code? Because we didn't want to assume that low code meant the same thing to everyone. On today's webinar, what we'll do is share the results of that low code. And to discuss those results, I'm joined by a distinguished list of panelists. And if I could have them introduce themselves at this point, we'll start with Hasan Yasar, who's with Carnegie Mellon. Hasan?
And Bill, thanks so much for having me. And it's a great opportunity for us and also honored to be part of this great group. I'm a technical director at the Software Engineering Institute and leading a group of continuous deployment of capabilities that is actually focusing on DevSecops, DevOps, and Agile, and helping the various DoD customers, and also setting the goals for the MLOps and low-code, no-code at SCI, and helping more about the kind of last mile of the delivering the capabilities and into either the warfighters or any type of end users, and using the modern technologies that group is focusing. So I'm leading that group. And also I'm a adjunct faculty member at the Carnegie Mellon teaching software security courses at the Heinz College. And also I'm teaching DevOps courses since 2015 at the ISR under CMU as a graduate program.
Great, thanks Hasan. Next we have Tracy Bannon from MITRE.
Hey guys, so my name is Tracy Bannon. I am a senior principal with MITRE Corporation. If you're not familiar with MITRE, it is a federally funded research and development corporation. These organizations were chartered by Congress. Actually, Hasan works with Software Engineering Institute, which is another FFRDC. That's one of the ways that Hasan and I have been working together for quite a number of years now. We're chartered by Congress to make sure that we are objective technical advisors. I spend my days as an architect and engineer, as a DevOps advisor, helping the federal government to define their pathway forward, identifying the technologies, and not specific to DevOps, but I'm looking at low-code and no-code solution sets. I'm looking at broad ecosystems. What's the impact on from a security perspective? So very similar to what Hasan does. We run in similar circles. I work across defense as well as what I call public sector, so the civilian side of things as well. But yeah, I'm really excited just to be a part of this conversation today. And I'm really glad, Bill, that you've taken the helm. The low-code, no-code, there was a flavor that we kicked off about a year ago, and COVID just laid us low to be able to drive that forward with Kirsten and ATARC. And I'm really happy that you were able to step in and really bring this to life again. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tracy. I'm glad we can work together on it. And finally, we have Edward Dalgallo, who's the Chief Enterprise Architect for the Federal Transit Administration. Edward?
Hi, good afternoon. I work for the Federal Transit Administration. Over there, we focus on public transportation. So that's your metro. If you're in the DC area, it's WMATA, or if you're in New York City, it's MTA. We provide a lot of the funding for those places to create capital investments. And also during COVID, we provided a lot of money to ensure the continuity of the operations still exists. Within my role, my main focus is I've built the governance platform and developed a lot of the DevOps framework for our low-code solutions. And I also run some ML, artificial intelligence programs where we're trying to mine our data and make better use of it. So right now, those are my two areas of focus. But in general, I focus on the newer technologies and try to figure out how we can build capabilities within our agency to succeed with that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Edward. And hopefully we'll also be joined by Captain Andrew Hutchins from the U.S. Marine Corps. So everyone who registered for today's webinar will receive a copy of the questionnaire results, and the recording is also going to be available on the ATARC YouTube channel as well as the podcast. So if you need to share this with anybody. According to Wikipedia, low-code is a development platform providing a development environment used to create application software through a graphical user interface instead of traditional hand-coded computer programming. So let me go ahead and Kirsten, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you see my screen? All right, awesome. And we'll go ahead and dive into it. So first of all, just to take a look at the responses that we got, we had a good mix of government and industry, 56% from government, 44% from industry. So that was good to see. And our first question in the questionnaire was, what does low code mean to you? And it was no surprise to me, using low code or using little to no code to build software, 29% was the biggest. Hasan, maybe I can start with you on this question. Was there anything that jumped out as being surprising?
I think that the things one that was surprising me, and the second response, which is using citizen developer to develop an application. It's really important to understand what the citizen developers means, because it's very related to the low code and no code perspective. And citizen developer are like a regular users, which is consumers. So the consumer should really develop an application. That's actually, it's important. And I know it's a no code or not writing a code in application, but intent is really helping the end users or helping the actual users so they can use existing applications or some sort of platform to achieve their needs. It's more about the closer to the user perspective. And I'm glad to see that it's a 16%, but it's a good number and people are looking for that perspective because it's a fundamental concept as end user concept. And we were looking for a business manager as an example. We're looking for the users, they can go in a platform to achieve some of the capabilities for their report generation as an example. They might be needing some sort of report for their work. Maybe they're looking for some financial data. They don't need to go into the developers, ask the question, hey, developer, get me a report. They should be able to go to the platform as a citizen developers, do their own work. They're not trained as writing a code as we used to, but they are trained to use an application or a platform for their needs. That's important to me as the striking answer that I see on this first response as the citizen developers.
Yeah, I think Tracy, I was just going to lead into a question for you, kind of building on that citizen developer concept. One of the other answers that was typed in was not needing any software development skills or knowledge to create, applications here. I thought you may be able to comment on that.
I'm going to tie those two together. So Hasan has heard me say that I have a love and a hate for the term citizen developer. The goal of these platforms, it's not as though there's a singular platform, and maybe up front we need to say that low code, no code is across the spectrum. There are things where I can set my functional person down, I can set the business owner down, and I can have him be enabled, and he can get what he's looking for and then share it. And that's one end of that spectrum. There are also other low code, no code platforms or offerings that are a lot of really amazing widgets for someone with a little bit more technical capability or technical understanding to knit together, but rapidly knit them together. So it is very much a spectrum of those platform offerings. So looking at it from that perspective, it's about enablement. The fundamental challenge is making sure that the enterprise that's leveraging the low code, no code environments for whoever is doing the front end configuring, that they do have the support that they need for when things happen underneath the covers. And I don't want to take us too far down a rabbit hole, but that's often a place where I see some difficulties with low code, no code, is when something really happens in those layers of abstraction. How do I help the citizen developer who has been thinking, who's been dragging something over and dropping it, and the widget isn't widgeting the way that it needs to widget, for example. Another concept for us to come back to will be, what is the right role of IT when we're talking about citizen developers? I will tell you that the majority of our citizen developers are not thinking necessarily about how do they make this as secure as possible, who's doing testing against it, who's thinking about the final product that actually is available to whoever the target set is. So IT doesn't go away, but their role changes in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a couple points later on here where we get into building bridges between the business or the functional side and IT. And it's funny, before we even went live, Tracy, you were talking about between you and your husband, kind of understanding, the role of the other side. So that's why I was surprised, not needing any software development skills, but it's certainly helpful to understand the role of the other side and the skills of the other side in business and in IT coming together to.
Yeah, there's an interesting piece to lay on top of that, Bill, and that is, even in an environment that is, if this tool, depending on which one that you're using, has a lot of capabilities that are there, if Andrew is building something and creates a widget to do something, and Hasan does the same thing, and Kirsten does this, and Bill does this, and Tracy does that, we're actually duplicating again and again and again inside our platform ecosystem. So there is goodness in starting to have centers of excellence or communities of sharing, whatever you want to call it, so that you can start to take some of those things that are being done in parallel again and again, and creating some custom capabilities or creating some core capabilities. But that is as you adopt it. That's definitely not on day one or day two, but that's as you really start to scale. And that's where some of that software engineering comes into play.
Agreed. Let's move on to the next question here. Has your agency adopted a low-code approach to app development? And this question, interestingly enough, did go out only to the government side. And so we had 72% that either said yes, low-code is one approach that's been adopted among others, or at least being evaluated. So that was a little higher than I expected. Edward, do you have thoughts on that?
Unmute, Edward.
Do we still have?
Bill, this is Captain Hutch in here. I was able to get in. I could probably take that, introduce myself too.
Yeah, please do, Captain Hutchin.
Yeah, great. Sorry about the technical difficulties I had. My name is Captain Hutchin. I worked at Headquarters Marine Corps at the Pentagon. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we installed some cloud instances that supported a few different business lines at Headquarters. And on top of that cloud, we had a few different platforms as a service, some of which were low code, no code. So I had some pretty deep experience with implementing low code at a rather large institution, and also have a pretty good background with risk management framework, authorities to operate, and cybersecurity. And Bill, to answer your last question, I actually think that response doesn't surprise me that much. I think the low code environment really has expanded over the past 4 years as I've been involved in it. It started with a few key players, but over time we're seeing more and more move in to include some of the bigger tech companies like Microsoft. So a lot of enterprises are built on Microsoft Office products, and now you're seeing their Power Platform come out within their Office 365 suite, which would qualify as a low-code option for an IT organization or a business leader. Over.
It's really a great point, because it is one of the strongest entries into this is the availability. I don't have to go out and search for it. Microsoft actually made it very indigenous, right? It's just there. So seeing some good, smart experimentation with that platform in particular in the government space.
Great. Let's move on. The next question was, what problems do you see low code solving? And at the top of the list here is speed up the application development process. That didn't surprise me. Do we have Edward? Are you back?
I guess he's having some audio issues still, maybe.
Okay, gotcha. Hasan,
Sure,
what are your thoughts on the breakout?
Great. So the main reason of why the students, developer, user needs the low-code platform, because they would like to speed up application, which is expected answer. Why they need to speed up? There are two reasons. Actually, one of them is it's not really, they don't want to depend on the approval process, first of all.
Right.
They would like to go really fast. Like for the little things, they need to achieve their job as the end users or citizen developer. And that will help, like a low code will help them to go get the result without having a further ATOs or the approval, which is a big barrier on application context. Second, if they would like to do a quick integration automation, they can do by themselves without getting a support from IT. We're not really dropping IT, as Tracy said, but we are using the platform, which IT will set up that platform. Once the platform is ready, once the platform is on place, and end user, student developer will go and speed up and get the report, get integration, get automation done, like Office 365 as an example, or any type of PowerShell, or any type of application. Even sometimes I used an example like an Excel macro. We are using the macro in a way that if the macro is enabled from the IT perspective, and then people can use Excel macro to do the great stuff. Now we can use that the concept in the SharePoint as an example. And similar things, if the application has that ability, and end users will get anything easily from an application context without going to approval, without going to purchasing process, without looking for open source, because it's there and they just go and use that. We will discuss further on the down, like for platform dependence and other things, but the intent is, let me get my job done. I don't want to learn a lot. I can get it done quickly, that's the main reason, speeding up the application deployment, because of eliminating an approval process, because of in acquiring, because of learning pieces.
Right. Captain Hutchins.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Tracy. Captain Hutchins, I know that you have experience related to, low code platform speeding up the ATO process. Maybe you could comment on that in a little more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we approached trying to get quicker ATOs was really like a two-step process in my mind. The first one was building robust inheritance models for the NIST 800 controls. And then the second was to try to automate testing and employing some DevOps tools. So for the no-code, low-code use case, the second part of stringing together a bunch of DevOps tools isn't really applicable, but the first is absolutely applicable. So where we really saw gains was by employing one of the low-code platforms, we were able to reduce the 403 moderate NIST controls for a basic application from about 400 down to 40 controls for the application owner. And what those controls really amounted to was making sure the individual application had their own access control policy, and really minutia things like that in the NIST 800 series. And the actual result of what we saw was we were getting ATOs on one specific low-code platform in about 6 weeks versus the traditional, 18 to 24 months that you'd see with a traditional DoD-built system. Over.
Appreciate it. Let's move on here. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't really explain the layered inheritance model very well there. So the way we approached the inheritance model was to try to create different layers within the IT stack and have each layer inherit the one under it, right? So the way our stack looked was we had the DoD network as the base layer that took care of a few of the 400 controls. Then on top of that, we had our cloud infrastructure, which had things like HBSS and ACAS scans included in it, which took care of a lot of the controls. And then on top of that, we had this low-code platform as a service, and that got us to that final delta of 40 controls for the application owner. So again, it was our enterprise network on the bottom, then we had some cloud infrastructure on top, and then the platform as a service before we started looking at the application ATO itself. Over.
Great. No, I appreciate it.
When you look at FTA, I mean, the other thing I would say with this too is that you can also ATO the entire platform. So like if you're doing like a platforming strategy where you're going to have multiple applications exist in the same place, then you can just ATO the platform. And so what that does for us is unless we introduce new code, there's no reason for us to worry about additional vulnerabilities. So what we do with low code is we really just configure things unless we want to customize on top of it. So customizing on top of it, you can introduce new code, but that's to give your platform new capabilities. But if you're not giving it new capabilities and you're just configuring with what's already on there, then you don't really have to worry about your configuration bringing in new security vulnerabilities. Instead, it's really just about updating paperwork. So that can drastically reduce the amount of time it takes to deploy something. So like for us, we can deploy things in as fast as like 3 or 4 weeks from when a customer comes to us with a requirement, because we're not as worried about some of these pieces. It's more about just doing paperwork and things like that.
That's great. So in that case, Edward, you're able to eliminate the ATO process?
Well, the ATO exists. It exists for the platform. So like, you know, before I had this platform, I had like 8 different applications. And every single one of those applications was like coded in .NET or something like that. And every single one of those applications, I would have to do an individual ATO for. I would have to scan the code because it was built in .NET. Now, if I buy one of these COT solutions, you know, like an Appian, a Salesforce, ServiceNow, whichever one, even Pega, the platform already exists with all this pre-built functions in it. And so I am just configuring the functions kind of like the way you would in Excel. I would say, you know, like VLOOKUP for something, or, you know, SUM. I'm using functions that are already in the code base of Excel. So if I scan Excel at the beginning and then I create a spreadsheet and I put things inside of it, that's not going to change when I do the scan, the results. And so that's the way we look at a platform, is we scan a platform, and unless we introduce new true code into it, it alters the way the platform exists. There's no reason to worry about the ATO really changing. So then it becomes more about tracking what you have on there. You know, what types of data do you have? Like, you know, like my platform can of course change if I like have moderate level risk with my data and then I move it to a high. Then I have to rethink the way that some of the stuff I'm doing on my platform works. But if everything stays consistent, then it's very easy from a security point of view to do that shift of adding something else.
That's actually a good point what Ed said. I really like that concept because it is really helping for the security perspective. I know we have a question that we ask, we'll kind of come back and discuss security perspective. So we're not really eliminating ATO, but really helping us to have a better security alignment and having it pre-approved the context and platform in advance, saving a lot of time, because it doesn't mean we are putting a code in, because we are approving the content already, which we have done. So we have more secure environment, more controlled environment. We know exactly with the security perspective.
A word that I use when I talk about low code, no code is jumpstart. It's providing a jumpstart where in the past I had to take care of a lot of the plumbing, and I had to double down on the different types of things that Ed was talking about and Andrew was talking about in terms of all of the implementation of the controls. The more that I understand what the platform provides as the jumpstart determines what I need to do on top of it. We talked about this a little bit before. To Ed's point, we may not be doing, there's customization and there's configuration, 2 different things that you do with low code, no code environments. The majority of the citizen developer is actually configuring. They are front end configurers. They have a beautiful WYSIWYG, they can drag drop things, they can put in their business process flows, they can net out, you know, how approvals flow through the system. When there are those more advanced features that might not be directly available, it's understanding what are the widgets that are available, what are the building blocks that are available, and then there are those additional customizations, not hard code coding on the side, but within the platform, how do they enable me to do those customizations, whether it's linking in an external API, whether it's tying into my ecosystem of other capabilities. But there are those 2 different pieces and parts to it. Configuration is different than customization. And the platforms themselves are all about providing jumpstarts, including what we've just talked about, which is that inheritance control, which is a massive jumpstart. 400 controls down to 40 for the business organization. That's an amazing reduction in what has to happen.
I also think with the way that this survey was done or the questions were done, that this was done from low code from an application development point of view. And that aligns more with like when you're talking about with like a Pega or Salesforce or Appian or one of those guys. But low code also exists in a plethora of things. I mean, I could look at Excel and use that to fit the definition of low code. And Excel can solve particular problems for me of dealing with ledgers or things like that. I could also take a tool like RapidMiner, which has a low code drag and drop component for data science. And I can transform my data and I can do data mining activities on my data. So low code has been done to minimize all sorts of different types of activities. And depending on what type of product you buy, it can solve a particular set of issues, but it narrows your vision too. So, if I take a low code solution, I'm not going to be able to build Call of Duty on it, right? You are like giving yourself a tunnel vision of a very particular set of solutions you want to solve when you choose to go with a particular low code solution. And that low code solution is going to be good at a couple of things, but it doesn't replace all software development either.
No, and we'll go back to low code, no code. It's a spectrum. And you're right. One of my favorite low code platforms is actually something called Node-RED, and it's low code programming for event-driven apps. But I've got to be thinking about how I'm building it and knitting things together. It requires a lot more hardcore effort and thought. It provides an awesome jumpstart, but to your point, it doesn't do everything for me. There are low code, almost no code platforms that provide a tremendous amount of out of the box capabilities that I literally need to tie it into my security model and I can start to work. And so it gets back to, what are we trying to accomplish? How fast are we trying to accomplish it? And it is all over the place. That's what makes this topic in particular a little bit difficult, because we ain't not talking about one thing. We're talking about an entire ecosystem of new types of platforms and capabilities. And you guys already know this, but I just want our listeners to start to get that as well.
Let's go ahead and jump, I guess to the opposite end of the spectrum. Here we're addressing, some of the problems that low code can solve. Ed, you began to take us into, some of the concerns around low code. It's interesting in terms of the feedback we got during the questionnaire here that the majority of the answers were in the other range. And some things jumped out to me, the ones certainly that I've highlighted in yellow here. One is, the challenge of finding, people trained in these solutions. Captain Hutchin, do you have some thoughts on, the challenge of finding, trained folks to be able to build out on these platforms?
Yeah, I can speak to this one. So the citizen developer concept was mentioned earlier in this call, and I think when we first stepped off on this line of effort was we thought we'd be able to take our business analysts throughout headquarters and have them be low-code developers, and I think what we realized very quickly was that was going to be quite challenging. One, to convince that analysts that they are now going to be working on some sort of technology that they're not used to, and then two, getting them the requisite training to get their skills up. So what we ended up doing was everything was contracted out, and what I found over the 3-4 years is I was only really able to tap into 1 to 2 really proficient contractors, but I was not able to find a large swath of developers like I would if I put out a basic front back-end web developer RFP, right? So when I asked to find some sort of low-code development capability, I was really only getting responses back from a select few contractors in the DC area. Over.
Great, I appreciate it. Tracy, I thought you might have some thoughts on the next one here, which is, business users just are not prepared to participate in the process.
Right. Well, I just heard Mr. Hutchison speak to this. It's hard to find them ready and able to be able to use these low-code development environments. There is a certain amount of upskilling. There's for the person who has been out there as a business, whether they're an analyst or whether they are the domain expert, They haven't had to be front on. They haven't had to think through the use of these tools. It also makes them a perfect investment. So if you can take that and help them because they become a better advocate for the use of those tools. As I'm looking at some of the things that are on screen here around low code, inherent vulnerabilities of the tool, cost, those are all viable things to be concerned about. But this is an architectural trade-off just as the same way that if I were writing a custom piece of software from the ground up for whatever reason, I have to understand the trades. I have to understand the trade-offs. Somebody has to be in the mix. Where I've seen this fail has been when there's been a strong arm for IT. I feel that, and I'm acting on, I'm using my role play voice here. I don't want to deal with IT. They're constantly slowing me down. Their backlog is so far out. It's going to take me months before they even are able to respond to me. They're underfunded. They're understaffed. If I can just get my folks to use this tool, we can do this ourselves. There's a danger there because ultimately you do have to understand that this is in the government space, security still matters. There are still policies and rules in place. So there's a really fine balance that I'm sure Ed and Mr. Hutchison have run into, where you want to enable folks, you want to provide them with the upskilling, you create maybe centers of excellence or communities of practice around it, and you provide centralized guidance, but ultimately you still have to work within the confines of policy or be changing policy so that you're not avoiding IT, which is your safety net. They are absolutely your safety net in all of this.
Great. Thanks, Tracy.
Ed, do you see the same thing?
I mean, when I look at this list, a lot of this isn't my concerns because I think you also have to compare it against everything else.
Yep.
So when I look at connection between legacy and low code, I could also say that I have a lot of problems with connection between legacy and legacy. That's one of the problems with legacy is connecting with it. And that's why I think RPA tools have become predominant. RPA is not anything fancy. All it does is it just moves data between systems. And that's what it really is. It's a fast way to build connections. And that's why it's become popular, is because there's a lot of people out there with legacy systems. To me, I look at low code as something where I'm paying money. It is a cost. And that cost gives me speed. That's what I'm paying for. I want to build things faster. And when you talk about building things faster, then business units may not be prepared to fully participate because I'm building it faster. There's going to need to be more engagement. That's the challenge with agile and change management. You really need with low code to run things in an agile way. If you do low code where you're building things really fast and you're building it in a waterfall, you're not going to get as much benefit out of it because you're going to be redoing things constantly still. And therefore you're paying for the speed, but you're not getting the speed. What I am losing with it though, and I talked about it a little bit earlier, is there can be scalability challenges and there can be flexibility challenges. On one end of the spectrum is machine code. I can write things in 0101. And some places still do that. Facebook does that. Facebook does that with some of the pieces of their stack because they have, a billion users on their stack, and it doesn't make sense to them to write stuff in C++ or Java and lose that little bit of performance. So instead, they write stuff in machine code to get maximum amount of performance. On the exact other side of the spectrum is low code, no code. And so I've now honed in on a particular set of capabilities or solutions I want to solve with low code, no code. And, I do have a risk of scalability issues. I'm not going to be able to create Facebook with 1 billion users easily using some of these low code, no code platforms. I probably will hit a wall with the way they are because, the way that they're designed to handle activities and things will be made in a particular way. It might not be made for that large of a user set or things like that. So those are the issues that you can run into, is really around the flexibility around what you want to do your solution with. So you should really understand where your low code, no code solutions are targeted to solve. And, how many users are you trying to put in this? And, will you be able to code something in a way where it will work with that volume of users? And then outside of that, the other issue or challenge, honestly, is around integrator lock-in. If you're paying somebody to like, be in their ecosystem. And then, you're kind of committing to it. So now you're like really stuck in it. Like if I choose one of these vendors and I start building stuff in it, it's not going to be easy for me to migrate out and go somewhere else, because there aren't a lot of tools out there, as far as I know, that exist that can take like a Salesforce and turn the code into .NET. I'm going to have to understand what I built in Salesforce, then I'm going to have to redo it in .NET if I want to leave one of those platforms. I'm just using Salesforce as an example.
Go ahead, Hasan, please.
Yeah, I think what you said, Ed, I mean, people should understand that, first of all, as you said, we need to find that low code. What is my business reason that I would like to choose it, which is the kind of, what's the purpose? Because there's a misunderstanding. People are really thinking, and low code will solve my problem. No, it's going to solve your business specific problem, first of all.
Yes.
We're not replacing everything. We're just looking for a replacement for the business needs. That we can, and other things also, as you said, the key point, we are using the platform that's offering capability within the platform. However, there is also connectivity between the platform as well. We can connect the dots. So some platform will give a capability like through the API, through some services, still we can connect the dots. And then maybe like using a no code, just a visual representation of the thing we are building, use a little bit of the code as behind automation, we can connect the two platforms. It's very difficult to get from one another, but maybe we can exchange the data in between. And using the connectivity tools, maybe we have to ask the question ourselves as the users, what are the platform capabilities are? How can I connect the two different platforms to exchange data? How can I connect the two things in a different perspective so we can achieve our business continuity? So that goes back to like what the platform is offering for us and what things we expect from the platform. And which is one of the biggest concerns for me. How can I connect the two different platforms in a way that I can exchange data? Since we are living in a very connected environments, and we can use that like right now, we are using a Google Authenticator for various applications. We have some sort of connectivities. We not realize that, but we have connectivities. The similar things and most of the low-code platform are offering that capabilities. We can connect that. We can use their APIs. We can exchange data. We can use some information from that, export it, import it. There's other possible way we can use that. We're not really converting everything to one to another, but we are able to connect the dots in between.
Right. I appreciate it. Let's go ahead and move on to the next section here. I guess the question is, do you agree with the following statements? And the ones that jumped out were at the top and the bottom for me. So low code helps bridge the gap between IT and business. Tracy, you certainly have been talking about that. And then low code development here at the bottom. Low-code development platforms help overcome data and information silos. That was kind of a 50-50 almost in terms of the answers that we received back. Captain Hutchin, do you have thoughts on that one in terms of bridging the gap between data and information silos?
Yes, sir. One of the biggest advantages we realized after implementing a low-code platform for 3 years is we now have a very, very rich, I don't know what buzzword to use, but we have one location where we have a bunch of our data that was previously stored in Excel sheets and PDFs and places that aren't accessible, right? So one of the biggest advantages we saw with this low-code implementation is we suddenly had this massive amount of data brought in from the dozen or so applications that we built that we were able to collate and create some really meaningful dashboards and executive level views for folks that never in their career had ever been able to see all these different business processes and their data come together. So I would actually disagree with that survey, and I actually thought we got less siloed in our data. And then looking across other systems and agencies, because our low-code platform had a built-in API, we were very easily able to share, publish and consume others' data, which is really cool. So I actually think one of the biggest advantages of our implementation of low-code was that we have a bunch of data now that we can make sense of, and that we can move that data across the larger agency. Over.
Great.
I think you brought up something that's really important, and that it's the context of the solution space that you're in, the context of the business space or the warfighter space that you're in matters tremendously. I think where I'm seeing that it is making more silos is when there's already a rich ecosystem and this new platform is brought in and it has its own ways of storing the data potentially. And to Hasan's point earlier, I need to understand how I'm going to gain visibility across my entire enterprise. So I agree that in certain situations, there's an amazing amount of goodness because you are able to get data into a reusable, more centralized, unless you're using data virtualization or other techniques, but you are able to get that. So it's very much going to be mixed and based on the context of your problem set. And I know that's a consulting kind of answer, but I don't mean it to be dismissive, but more the opposite. Everything that we're talking about today is tempering this. Don't just go buy a low-code, no-code platform. What are you trying to solve? What do you hope to gain from it? Understand, go in eyes wide open with all of these different types of informations that are coming from this survey and the experience sets that Ed and Captain Hutchinson and others have. Over.
Hasan, 74%, or the question here in the middle, 74% agreed with the statement, I consider low-code platforms to be a form of software factory. We've seen a lot of organizations move to the concept of software factory. Platform One in the Air Force, comes to mind. Do you have thoughts on that?
Actually, I was about to say that. Thanks, Bill. I'm not agree with this result because people are confusing software factory term. We are like there are two different things here. Like we are talking about existing a platform that we are building business application on it. It's a different thing. We are producing an application. Software factory is a very overloaded term, and which is platform. As you give an example, Bill, we have a platform which is DevSecops environment. People are using that platform, are building application for their needs. They're using code, they're using other automation tools, they're using some other tools, building up an application, which is more a specific application they are building, versus low-code platform, it's just limited to only a platform capabilities. It is not a software factory. So when you say software, there should be multiple platforms in it, has to be multiple language support in it. But low-code platform are specific to the platform itself, only achieving some specific business application needs. So you should not be treated as a software factories. Right. Software factory is really bigger than the low-code platform, Bill.
Great, I appreciate it. Obviously, we're seeing. Yeah, go ahead. Is that Ed?
Captain Hutch here. I actually I worked at Platform One for during 2020, in addition to this low-code experience, and I would agree with Hasan. Like I disagree that any of these low-code platforms are a quote-unquote software factory. The software factory is effectively stringing together all those DevOps tools to automate that code from, code commit through deployment. That to me is a software factory, not configuring applications within a low-code platform. Over.
Maybe we can add last statement. We can say software factory can produce multiple low-code platforms, which is output of the software factories.
I think we need an entire other webinar just on software factories.
Correct. Yes.
And then we'll have another one on RPA.
I think we should do that. I think we should do that. It's a really, really important term, and we should discuss in detail architecture perspective, user perspective, pipeline security perspective. That's be another webinar.
So there's some interesting things on this slide. So we're at slide 8 of the 11 or 12 that we've got to cover here today. Obviously there's a big push to make use of artificial intelligence and machine learning across government, a lot of initiatives and money going into that. One of the things that I've seen is a lot of AI happening, in the lab, being able to prove it out and so on. I guess my question here to the panel is low code potentially a good opportunity to operationalize that AI, to be able to take models that are developed and connect them in with, processes and processes across or applications across an enterprise. Ed, do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm doing it, so I do think it's something. A couple things with this is that AI is the range of things for people too. Some people consider, they put in an AI solution if they use Google natural language processing and they plug it into their app. You know, for me and my organization, AI is really focused on building the capability, and that's my level of understanding of my data and what I can automate with my data analysis with my data and building algorithms around that. Most of these low-code technologies are modern platforms. So because of that, you have the ability to connect through web APIs. Because you have the ability to connect through web APIs, naturally you should be able to connect to machine learning, because most machine learning algorithms are just web services that are algorithms published with it, like in those solutions. So, you know, you take your data and, you know, you develop an understanding of it, and then you say, you know, can I automate data analysis? And for me, I saw some areas like anomaly detection, doing the grant apportionments, things like that. Compliments. So like Amazon, you know, when you go to Amazon and, you know, you might buy like a pair of shoes, Amazon says to you, hey, when somebody buys these shoes, they like to buy this shirt, or they buy socks with it. So there's compliments. And so like within our systems, we look for areas where we think if somebody does something, is there something else complementary they might do? So we've been doing a lot of lab work in those areas, and we're going to start putting out there algorithms to solve some of these pieces. So I think low code can certainly do that, but I mean, you know, you have to do a lot of investment and build a data capability to get there. For it. But then, like, you know, if you also want to just do image recognition or, you know, natural language processing, you can plug into already created products from other companies such as Google and IBM and things like that too. And since these are all on modern technologies, they should be able to just hook in through a web point of view.
And to your point, Ed, a lot of it depends on which platforms, which low code, no code offerings that you're looking at that already have some of these features and capabilities built in already. You can train an algorithm based on where they have AI already embedded, and so that it's a matter of you allowing it to be turned on, right? You can choose where you want to turn it on and where not have it.
It's definitely true. I think the challenge with that, at least for me, is that any ML algorithm I build, I need to have explainability to. So I need to understand the reason why it makes its decisions, so that again gets back to your understanding of your data. So I'm going to build something, and then I'm going to send it some information, and then that ML is going to make a choice. Somebody later might ask me why that ML did that, and I better have a good answer. You know, that's the one challenge with it.
And plus, Ed, you need another interface and utilize the ML, that data you created. Like, you need the end users, you need some interfaces, which is kind of AI systems. If the system platform doesn't have any type of AI usage of any data you generated, like in terms of recommendation as an example, has to be built on the part of, you may have a recommendation algorithm that you build it. If there is an ability to deploy that ML capabilities, which is not going to achieve the AI perspective as well. People are saying that I can use ML, but how can I deploy the ML into an application context, which is requiring another framework, another wrapper, another services, as using the ML generated a model or the data itself.
Yeah, I do the ML outside of the low code, certainly.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
And let me throw another bit into that there, and we can have another conversation another day about this. And that is, some of the AI that I'm talking about is actually allowing us the observability. So it's what's actually happening in that production environment when folks are out there. So I'm able to gather analytic. I'm able to, not talking necessarily about building an ML and training and that algorithm, but there are jump starts to allow me to better understand how people are interacting with the application, the data itself, how they're interacting with the data. So some of those features that we would want that take a lot of effort are there for us to turn on. It's not necessarily making the business decision, but it is sure as heck helping us with observability and the operations, because these things do have to operate as well.
Great. I appreciate it, Tracy. So moving on to the last two slides in the deck, we're just getting feedback from the ATARC community in terms of, for this working group specifically around low code, what are the things that the community would like us to focus on moving forward? Certainly future versions of this webinar, which we plan to have one a month. and as well as potentially maybe some white papers and so on. But mostly right now, the working group is focused on holding webinars like this, where we can get the community to talk about things like specific examples. I see examples and use cases. So our webinar coming up next month will be on specific programs and applications in government where low code is being adopted, so that we can share those examples and talking about adoption and so on. The second one here, application testing and automation. Captain Hutchin, you had addressed this early on in your introduction. Maybe you can talk a little bit more detail about how at the Marine Corps you tackled this.
Sure thing. Yeah. So I think it's been mentioned a few times today that because when you invest in a low-code platform, you're actually investing in the platform itself and you're configuring within that platform. And because of that, you actually really don't need to do any individual application testing on individual applications or workflows that come out of your business. So the bulk of the testing and scanning is really done at the platform level. So whatever that vendor is that you choose for low code, you'll just be scanning that platform. And that is definitely the preferred approach to ATOs. The one I described that we implemented was a little bit of I had to come to middle ground with others in our organization as to why the individual application needed ATOs. But I think the best way to do this is to just accredit up to the platform level and then continue your automated scans at the platform and really nowhere other than that. Over.
Ed, I had a question for you around the last one here, the last bullet around best practices. In your introduction, you talked about, establishing policy and potentially things like a center of excellence around the adoption of these types of tools. Do you have thoughts on establishing best practices within an agency?
Yeah, I mean, we had to, I would say that. So, when you do a platform, so that means that everything is going to exist in the same place. That means that everything needs to play together in some ways. Mm-hmm. So the big thing is, I have one platform. I had 8 applications before, and now I have this one. Now I have all the users in the same place. So if I decide to deactivate a user for a grant solution, I need to make sure that user isn't active anywhere else. So now I have to create some shared services on my platform that everybody leverage and use.
Exactly.
Right? And those have to work well to play together. So we have to build those solutions, and then we have to put guidance around them. But then there's other things you got to worry about too. So if I have 8 applications, now I have them all in the same place, I got to make sure there's some consistent level of performance, because I don't want one application to bring down all 8 of my applications. So now that becomes about standards. So, I have some accelerators or pieces that are in place so that every single one of my things doesn't have to worry about how you log in, how you manage users, how you authorize users. That is all standardized. Every single application has to build things that same way. They also have to code things in a similar manner, whether it's just standardizing the way that interfaces will look or thresholds even on performance. So we've defined what is good in our low-code platform for how you build things, and some things that they can do or don't do, and other criteria that they must meet in order to go live with production.
And then one of the things that, sorry to interrupt, one of the things that you're calling out is a question that Bill asked early on. Business on its own won't necessarily do this, and citizen developers getting access to a platform aren't going to do this. You're an enterprise architect, and you were able to put that enterprise architecture scaffolding around it, centralizing guidance, centralizing those things that can be impactful on other people, looking at where you need to build those core capabilities or competencies or services. And that's one of the places where folks are not yet maturing towards, but you have definitely laid that groundwork. I think that's probably one of the most important messages going away is don't throw out that centralized guidance. Don't throw out the need for governance and those kinds of assets and capabilities that you're describing.
When you talk about the COE, that's exactly what it's about. It's about benefiting the enterprise and focusing on that, guys. And the only other area I would bring up that's really important is your data. So we spent a lot of time defining the do's and don'ts of how you structure data. And that had a lot of benefits. One, it allowed us to identify where other shared services might be needed for our policies. And the other was it made our data more easier to interpret so that report writers later could take that stuff that we built and be able to write things quicker for it and have a better common understanding of what this information all meant.
Great. Thanks, Ed. And, you know, our last slide here has a couple other things folks are asking us to focus on. I think most of these we addressed pretty well in terms of security. Tracy, you might have some more to talk about, you know, the spectrum of DevSecops. We do have one of the upcoming webinars that we have planned is on low code and the cloud, which will certainly address FedRAMP and then moving into DoD and levels like IL4, IL5, IL6, that sort of thing. I think we've covered citizen development pretty well. Securing the org, probably the ATO conversation. Tracy, do you want to have any additional thoughts around DevSecops?
We've covered quite a gamut here. I think the most important thing is that in understanding that platform that you're going to be embracing, it's going to be part of your ecosystem. It may or may not have its own inbuilt DevSecOps features, and I'll use the term features. DevSecOps is not one thing. It is not something that you go and do or procure DevSecOps. It is not a single tool chain. It's a group of philosophies and capabilities that you implement vis-a-vis technologies and with the humans in the loop. I say that lofty bit because you need to figure out for your low-code environment where your risk areas are, how you're going to execute your tests, what kind of scans need to happen or not because of the type of platform that you're leveraging. And you need to be able to very specifically defend how you're accomplishing those things with this low-code platform. It may provide you all of those things. It may provide you next to none of those things if it is more towards the low code versus the no code. So just be cognizant of asking what the additional abilities are when it comes to the tool itself. Enable the citizen, but don't forget about the fact that we need to move what the citizen configured out into production environment. So
Gotcha.
Ed, anything you'd say on that?
No, I mean, I agree with what you said there. One of the other interesting things is that we do have intake. So we've had a couple of times where people have built things, but then, you know, when they build their solution, then what we have to do is we have to refactor it a little bit and make sense of it into our enterprise. And I really think that is where things will eventually be. I mean, I think there's some challenges with a lot of technologies to have citizen developers. Citizen developers exist in things like Excel to me, because people use them for a lot of different things in their lives. But, you know, if I take one of these low code things and I say, hey, build me a solution, if you're not using it for a bunch of things in your everyday thing, you know, how are you ever going to get to enough hours to be good or proficient with it? They talk about like a 2,000 hour rule or a 10,000 hour rule. You know, you need to put in a good amount of time in something in order to be good and build it. And, you know, that's one of the other challenges I see with citizen development is that, you know, yeah, somebody can take a tool and they can pick up on pieces of it pretty fast, but if they're not using it a lot with a high frequency, they're never going to be good with it. But in cases where we do end up seeing that, then it is about taking what they do and finding ways to plug it into the enterprise and consumption. And I think in the end, though, what we'll see more citizen development around data than we will around application building and data consumption.
In closing things out, then, I appreciate the panelists today. If we could maybe just keep it to 15 to 30 seconds or so, kind of go around and have any closing thoughts or closing comments, not necessarily about, you know, the questionnaire per se, but maybe about the committee and where we should focus, and about, low code in particular. Hasan, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to say a couple of words, and we heard about the good platform perspective, ATO perspective, and I really advise the people to think about as the end user perspective and ask ourselves why I need that platform, what is the purpose, what is the reason I would like to solve. And I really prefer that people should think about what things I'm solving and then pick the tools after that. Usually folks are picking the tools, picking the technologies, then after that try to change themselves based on the technology limitations. And that's really a bad route, because we are becoming, as kind of technologies bending our processes, our practices, we are becoming either a vendor lock-in or tool limitation with the tools. I really advise the folks think about the reverse direction, ask ourselves why I need it, and then they try to bend the tools for to serve our needs. So instead of tool is changing our processes and techniques, let the process dictate what tools do for us.
Thanks, Hasan. Tracy, some closing thoughts?
As quickly as I can, I agree with everything that Hasan said. At the end of the day, guys, take a step back and ask why. What are you trying to accomplish? Why do you need to do it? Do not go tool first. There are amazing tools that are out there. You will find one that fits your needs. If you define your needs, lightweight definition of what those things are. Don't be afraid to have IT as part of your conversation. Actually embrace IT as part of the low code, no code business and IT conversation. That's all.
Appreciate it. Captain Hutchin, some closing thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to reemphasize something said earlier that, implementing Agile next to low code is absolutely the best practice. I think we've beaten up the citizen developer pretty good on this webinar, but where I'd say we found utility in the analysts in our organization was having them serve as a product owner, where they dedicate a few hours every 2 weeks and attend sprint reviews and really guide the development team to get a good end user solution. So just foot stomping that Agile and low code go very well together, but I'll also caution you that Agile, when done well, is actually probably more disciplined than Waterfall is. Over.
Great, appreciate it. And Ed, close us out.
Yeah, I think whether you're into customer platform, the other thing, we've been talking about a lot of the benefits of just platforming. And I think that's really what's important, is that everybody should be platforming to increase your speed and time to market with your applications. If you do go down the low code route, make an investment in really understanding what your technology does. I think the people who succeed the most are the people who have a good understanding of what they have. In the private industry, I look at like Capital Ones as like the great stories, or Vanalt, the tennis company. They're ones who made digital part of their DNA. And that's what you really need to do as an organization, is make digital part of your DNA by owning the technologies that you have.
Great. All right, everyone, I appreciate it. Thanks for joining. And we'll see you. Our next webinar, I believe, is scheduled for August 30th, but we'll get details on that out to you soon. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Out.